So the roadmap, here's the roadmap for the next 48 hours. Saturday night, we're going to be talking about resurrection. Shh. Don't let that get out, okay? We've got a great program that's turning on that Saturday night. So I thought I would start tonight by talking a little bit about resurrection. Kind of the movie trailer, you know. You see if it's worth coming back on Saturday night for the real show. The definition of resurrection is to rise from a lower state to a higher state. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that idea of the rising, of the change that's required in resurrection, of the letting go of empty tombs, of vacant crosses, of the concept of what it means to be willing to come into a new space. I am only the first who's going to talk about those things. You're going to hear about them all tomorrow. But I thought we would talk a little bit about that and what stands in the way sometimes. Maybe the first thing we talk about, though, is what gets us going to change. There tend to be two common things that move us to change. The status quo isn't working for us, or the status quo isn't working for others, or both. So something isn't working in the status quo. So the question might be, how do we let go of those things which have given us a lot of meaning up to that point? And that's pretty important. Something that's been really precious to you. It's not hard to let go of something that you never really cared much. But a certain idea, a certain practice, when you feel it's no longer serving you, when you don't want it to be part of your history, how do you let go of a false landmark? That's how Mary Baker Eddy refers to it. Doesn't say it's a bad landmark. Doesn't say it's an evil one. It just may be one that's no longer steering your course. How do you let go of something like that? Well, I thought I'd share a little bit about my own background on this, a little bit about my history, my risings, what lessons I've got from my family about this. It's interesting, maybe like some of your families, I have 4 grandparents, one I never knew. There were beyond them another set of great-grandparents. And all the family traditions that we have in my family come down from one great-grandparent. They're kind of a colorful group. They were a bold group. They were a group of French utopianists. And they moved over here in the mid-19th century. And my great-great-grandfather founded the 7th and last of these communities. The movement was called the Icarian movement, and it was the largest non-sectarian, which is to say non-religious community of utopianists in American history. And my great-great-grandfather founded the 7th and last community about 75 miles north of San Francisco in northern Sonoma County, near the coast, about 1881. Now, here is their philosophy, and this is maybe something instructive to the message for tonight and this weekend. The fellow who started the Icarian movement, Etienne Cabet, tried to create a community that would follow the ethics of Jesus without its theology. He was a humanist, and beautiful ideas. But throughout history, back even to Jesus' parables, seeds that fall on ground where they don't develop strong roots don't grow very far. And that's been a part of my memory of this group. I kind of, in my generation, am the one who seems to know the most about it. I'm the oldest son of the oldest daughter of the oldest daughter of the oldest son. I've got some of the stuff from the original community in our home. It's got a California State historical marker on it. Beautiful ideas, but they couldn't quite carry it off. And I'm going to suggest to you that that has a lot of relationship to our theme this weekend: healing and the kingdom of God. And Jesus' instruction in Luke 10 that you don't want to try to separate those things. And if you try to separate your healing powers, as some of the disciples were inclined to do when they came back with their report of great success in Luke 10, if you try to separate that from the core theology, you come up wanting. And Jesus remarked, if you remember in Luke 10, when they told them about all the powers, all the physical changes, all the dynamism that they were able to evidence and manifest through their work, he said, that's really great. And I think he meant it. Because physical healing is important. It's very important. But have you ever heard the old statement that your greatest weakness is an exaggeration of your greatest strength? When people became too consumed with the physical prowess of the ministry, it often was at the expense of the force behind it and the real healing behind it, which was what Jesus said they needed to be sure they didn't forget. He said, that's great. That's great. But be not so impressed with that as whether or not your name is written in the kingdom. Remember this? Pretty profound. And I'm going to go on to suggest, too, that this is one of the challenges that religions are having in contemporary life. Because a lot of people confine the idea that religions are primarily about belief systems, do's and don'ts, rules, judgment, and keeping up appearances. So much so that what do you hear today? People say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. We're going to talk more about that this weekend. There's some great answers coming out about that issue. But testifying time here. When I was growing up, I did go to Sunday school every week. And when I had problems, I prayed about them, and I tried very hard to obey all the rules. I must say there were times at which obeying those rules wasn't that hard because I didn't want to do that much when I was a little guy. And I assuaged my feelings when I got older because whatever I did do, I always thought I was doing less bad than others. And that made me feel like a good boy. And when I wasn't feeling a need, a problem in my life, prayer was kind of an option. The idea that was lacking was this kingdom concept that said your spirituality animates your religion, and your religion supports your spirituality. There's been studies done about this movement we identified of being religious or being spiritual but not religious. And the most interesting change in studies of the religious landscape in the last 10 years has been the number of people who are saying now, I'm spiritual and religious. I need something more than just myself to support my life. Spirituality is that which gives you a sense of purpose, that gives you a sense of calling, uniqueness, service, contribution, connects you to others, connects the fragments of your life, pulls it all together, gives meaning, gives direction. And religion, if it's not animated by an attention to what's going on with you, may not deliver that for you. And that's why you got to make sure we don't sell religion short. So when I was a kid, what was my animating spirituality? I told you my religion was very observant, but it really was about something quite different than going to church. It really was about baseball. That's what it was about. And the lessons learned in baseball. Thank you. Baseball, after all, was explained to me early on, is a more spiritual sport than others. especially football. I got contrasted on football a lot. Football has some very aggressive language. There's the sack, the blitz, the bomb, the Hail Mary. In baseball, you have the sacrifice. It's just a very different tone of things, really. In football, you wear a helmet. In baseball, you wear a cap. It's kind of fun. You probably understand I'm riffing now on a George Carlin routine, and I'm totally stealing his material. But there's a great comparison. He said the whole basis of the game is different. In football, the quarterback, often known as the field general, is to launch a sustained attack, including area bombardment as well as forward ground movement, to penetrate the enemy's defenses and score a goal. In baseball, the whole object is to go home. Isn't that beautiful? Go home. I like that. Yeah. One of the best baseball movies is one called Bull Durham. Some of you may remember Susan Sarandon playing a baseball fan and temptress, and she does a whole thing about the Church of Baseball. You remember this? Some of you remember this? Some nodding heads. For instance, you will never again look at a baseball in the same way. How many stitches are there on a baseball? Susan does this in a riff in the movie. 108. She says, that's exactly the same number as there are rosary beads. I guess you could pray by counting the threads on your baseball. Going to a baseball park, especially when you're a young boy for the first time and you go into a major league stadium, it's kind of like coming into a cathedral. It's got an awesome space. And when you watch baseball, you're always watching for an extraordinary moment. Something that lifts you above the normal, that's extraordinary. The catch, the hit, the play. And maybe that is an element of spirituality. I certainly know that what was important was to have an icon who embodied those things for you. I had an icon. His name is written on this ball. He signed it. His number is on the back of this jersey. Who am I talking about? Willie Mays, the obviously greatest ball player, all-around ball player who ever lived, right? Yeah, and I have his, the baseball card sealed in plexiglass. I mean, these are all kind of reverential figures. I didn't have a candle next to it on my nightstand, but I thought a lot about, and I tried to pretend to be Willie Mays. Even started a batting stance that cocked my knee like he did. I mean, I did all this stuff. And maybe this is not unlike what some of us think we're trying to do when we approximate a religious figure like Jesus. I think there's a lot about baseball that is remarkable, but it's not enough in the bottom line. But it was when I was a kid, because this is how I lived my life. Day in, day out, it was baseball, baseball. My dad became a baseball coach, and we could never get him to take off time from work. He owned a little grocery store, had to pay someone to work for him. Never got him to take off time from work until he became a baseball coach. Then all of a sudden, it was okay to have days off, and he coached boys baseball for many years in our hometown and was eulogized in the local paper by people who remembered what he had been, particularly to a lot of the young boys in town who didn't have a father in their life. It was pretty special. So I appreciate all that was there. I connected with my dad through baseball. There's a liturgy about baseball. You can tell statistics. It's a great sport for statistics. You recall stories and games. You use catchwords like the catch, and you all know what we're talking about. Willie Mays running full speed in the center field ball and catching it over his shoulder. All those things are the same thing that you begin developing when you start thinking about the Bible. So what I started to do was look for something that would be more fulfilling to the life that I wanted and a life I was feeling called to than that. And I went into the chaplaincy. I felt a call, and it was a dramatic physical healing for me that brought me into a sense that the calling of life was not to use God to make my agenda work, but to realize, and I heard this in a very specific way, frankly, in my life, that my life wasn't mine to call. And I have kind of struggled with that, challenged with that, probably look back and say moments I didn't do it right, but over all the decades since I was 18 years old, there's been that recalling thing that this wasn't your life to live. And it has put me in line then with people like Paul, who said, I am dead, and it's Christ that lives within me. I don't think I've demonstrated that in any regard, but there's something pulling about that message that's kept me going. It's kept me animating me in every activity I've taken on. It's drawn me through a practice of spirituality and religion that has been the heart of my life. Now, that said, part of that story is that what got me into that life, I had to leave. When I was ready to make a big change in my life, I was in the chaplaincy, having a very good Air Force chaplaincy. I was having a very good experience. I'd been the only chaplain in a 3-year grouping of chaplains that would be competing for promotion. Years that had been to the Air War College and residence. For a young chaplain, had worked for the Department of Defense, not just an Air Force position. I'd had some things that were really, really positive, but I felt like I was being called to leave them. And that's a very big challenge, because I didn't know what I was leaving them for. And I left them to become Dean of Students at Principia College. And I felt like I learned a lot there, but I also know in some ways, I was still a Giants fan, even though I was living in St. Louis. Honesty time here. And I think in many ways I continued many traditional forms. Probably because I was convinced that that was what was known and what was expected. I'm approaching the 10th year of having left the dean's position. In fact, it was 10 years ago this summer. And starting in the trek of what I've been doing the last 10 years, which getting to know a lot of you and a lot of wonderful people who are also searching for what might be a more useful model for their life. And we moved into St. Louis and started some new things 10 years ago, and I had to change another one of these jerseys. So I had to come and be a Cardinal. And, okay. No. Thank you for that thought. Yeah. But part of the idea has been to be willing to take off something that you were comfortable in, that you were familiar with, that you knew, and that was safe, and try something different. And I think in doing that, whole parts of the Bible have become more significant to me. Passage I never would have seen before. For instance, that it seems like virtually everybody in the Bible is having to leave a place that they know to go to a place they don't know. And oh, by the way, let's talk about the children of Israel and that trip that they were on of leaving Egypt to go where? Promised land. That's what was on the brochure. You leave Egypt to go to the Promised Land. Where did all but 2 of them wind up? In the wilderness. Nobody tends to leave Egypt in their experience to go into the wilderness. And at best, they think the wilderness is a short stopover on the route to the Promised Land. That's repeated over and over again. That's kind of the iconic journey of the Bible, is moving from a lesser state Egypt to a higher functioning state. But in between having to shed Egypt, it was easier to take those people out of slavery than take the slavery out of those people. And that sifting is what we try to see happen at these Bible conferences. It's not about going home with who has the most notes to put in a file drawer when they get home. It's about saying, are you open when you see and hear and listen to each other, as well as the speakers who are here, that you're getting something that's authentically your own, that's remarkable. Mary Baker Eddy has this statement. Again, this is one of the things that's jumped to me in the last several years. She critiques the idea of stereotyped, borrowed speeches. I don't think it ever dawned on me that she wasn't saying, and this because this is probably what I was thinking, stereotyped, incorrect speeches. Well, of course you want incorrect things, but that's not what she says. Borrowed, secondhand, used, vicarious, someone else's journey. And the Bible stories we want to look at are ones that call us to the greater authenticity of our own journey. I've also had this challenge in my journey. Sometimes I'm tempted to see somebody else doing something really cool. And I think, I wonder if I should be doing that, or if I could do that. But then again, I'm just borrowing someone else's message from God. The challenge has been, and the adventure has been, to try to feel God's Spirit talking to us, and equipping us, and empowering us, and freeing us, and not looking for that to be a ticket to an easy life. It's been significant to me when I've done work in Acts, a book I've spent a fair amount in the last several years, that in Acts, the disciples are never promised an easy retirement. No one gets the timeshare on the ocean, you know. Nobody has the easy out. In fact, they're all prophesied to have a pretty rugged end. Why do they do it then? Because again, they have married a sense of spirituality with a vision of religion that fulfills their needs, that lights them up, that gives them purpose, that defines their being, that forms their bonds, that creates their community. It's raised the bar for me of what I want out of a religious community. I don't necessarily want sameness. Social orders premised on sameness die out. It's diversity. But it's also people who've come together willing to leave where they were and journey to a new space. I've had some of those great experiences in branch churches, and some I've had in fellowships around living rooms and bonfires and sessions at Bible conferences. I've done probably over 60 of them now in about 35 different cities. And they've each been rich when you have encounters with other people who are wanting to step as you do. And it's led to some very exciting opportunities. What I'm going to invite us to do this weekend is be ready to think about a new way that we might follow more radically the life of Christ. That we might hear the Bible speaking to aspects of our life that we thought it didn't really touch. An example. I think often we're tempted to see that the God message is again about those fairly limited sphere of things which we consider religious. Maybe for many of us it's a matter of our health care. But then I have a lot of friends. I've got a lot of friends on Facebook. It's funny, I see a lot of posts on there. It doesn't matter which political view they come from, left or right, but they're often expressing things that seem to have no connection to a biblical center or call. And both sides can claim that they do. But the lack of connection suggests that maybe we've made our sense of kingdom too small and our sense of healing too trite. That will be the first talk tomorrow morning, by the way, that Shirley Paulson's giving. Thank you, Shirley. I think that's very important. We're going to follow it up with a comment about how do you, in a nonpartisan way, bring the leaven of your thought to bear at this time of an election. The thought has been that we need to have a much larger sense of the kingdom and a much larger sense of healing and a much smaller sense of how much we need to control the two. And that Jesus would never have said that healing would be larger than the kingdom. In fact, he doesn't advertise his healing particularly well. Not like his message, his primary preaching message, that the kingdom of God is at hand. He actually raised questions about why some people were seeking healing. As much as he knew that some people sought it for more limited motives. And the interesting thing is, the more we claim the larger kingdom, the better we heal. And the more we heal. And the more we open the door to have ourselves cleansed of things we might not have thought we wanted to get rid of. That's part of the adventure too. Then we're living the life that the biblical prophets and apostles all did in being called to something that they hadn't necessarily sought, but they made themselves available to. That's the journey of this conference, and I'm glad you're here to be part of it.